Let us pray. Our Divine Father, as we conclude for this week our work in this assembly, we renew our thanks and ask that we may continue our work under your guidance. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, I should like to introduce to you and to honourable members of the Assembly two very special visitors in your gallery this morning. Mr. Speaker, and I'd ask these gentlemen to stand as I introduce them. Dr. Norbert Klinger, Minister Councillor of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany, located in Ottawa, visiting here in Edmonton. And the second gentleman, Mr. Speaker, perhaps very well known to honourable members of the Assembly, the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Mr. Erwin Ball. Mr. Speaker, Erwin Ball is about to retire from many years of dedicated service to the Federal Republic of Germany, and I think we should all be indeed proud that Mr. Ball and Mrs. Ball have chosen to retire here, not only in Canada, but in Edmonton. And I'm sure honourable members of the Assembly would join with me, Mr. Speaker, in wishing them an extremely happy retirement. Would the honourable members of the Assembly please welcome our special visitor.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Member for Tabor-Warner.
Mr. Speaker, it's indeed a privilege today to introduce on behalf of our colleague and good friend, the Honourable Member for Chinook, some 36 students from the grade 5 class, the Coronation School. They are seated in the members' gallery, and these students are accompanied by teachers Mr. Seltzner and Ms. Tupper, and by parents Mrs. Compton, Mrs. Heidecker, Mrs. Workinen, Mrs. Finbinner, Mrs. Takat, Mrs. Erickson, and Mrs. Christman. I would ask members of the Assembly to join with me in giving a warm welcome to these energetic students who have traveled up from Coronation.
Drumheller.
Mr. Speaker, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature 26 bright, eager, and enthusiastic students from the grade 6 class of St. Anthony's School in Drumheller. They are accompanied by the following parents, by their teacher, Mr. Jerry Hamilton, the parents, Mrs. Jane Denis, Mrs. Heckeluck, and Mrs. D. Shemansky, together with the bus driver, Mr. Mike Harrison. I'd like to ask them to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly 26 delightful students in grade 6 from the Jack Stewart School in Camrose. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Scott, and by a parent, Mrs. Whitelock. They're seated in the public gallery. I'd ask that they rise and receive the usual warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if you'd give me an opportunity to introduce certain people to the House. They're all familiar with them, however. I would have said this on the actual day, but that is a Saturday. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Member for Clover Bar and the Honourable Member for Calgary Elbow, who on the occasion of May the 23rd, 1967, became members of this Legislative Assembly and have served for a solid 20 years, effective tomorrow. I think it's quite a significant commitment to our province. The date isn't as significant to the Honourable Member from Little Bow, but he had joined the Assembly in 1963. However, he was elected, of course, in May 23rd, 1967 as well. I think it's something the House should recognize these three gentlemen for.
Member for Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly 37 students in grade 8 from the St. Mark's School in the constituency of Edmonton Kingsway. They are accompanied by two teachers, Mr. Tom Parada and Mr. Dallas Benz. I would request that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian and U.S. Trade negotiators have recently met in closed session at the Government Conference Centre at Meech Lake. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are obvious reasons why Brian Mulroney wants and needs a trade agreement with the U.S. It is not quite so obvious why a provincial government would support this need unless there are obvious benefits for Alberta. My question to the Premier, does the Premier continue to hold the view that U.S.-Canada talks are going on so well that Alberta will not insist on a ratification process?
Mr. Speaker, it's clear to the majority of Albertans how important these trade matters are to our province, and really they are to our country. There's no question that when you have a province like Alberta, which produces so much more than it uses, that the key element, therefore, is markets. And with protectionist moves throughout the world these days to get assured markets, because you can't plan your production on a day-to-day or year-to-year basis. You have to have long-term assurance of markets. That these trade talks are the kind of thing that can give us that. Now, Alberta has said one of the real mistakes would have been, as some timid Canadians have advocated, and through the NDP are in that group, that you shouldn't even try because you'll get beat anyway. Well, we couldn't have built this country with that kind of timidity. We are saying, Mr. Speaker, that we will try, and we're confident Canadians can do every bit as well as people in the United States, and that we can establish and negotiate a good trade agreement with them. If we cannot, then we will not be part of it. But I think that it's possible and that we're going to be able to do it.
Mr. Speaker, it has nothing to do with timid at all. All we want to know that there is a 49th parallel. We're not sure the Conservatives understand that. Now, my question to the Premier, because he said in the Assembly on April 10th, 1987, and I quote, that the trade agreement will eliminate tariffs, countervails that we have, matters such as FERC, as put on our natural gas, matters about softwood timber. And he says it will either eliminate those things, or I don't think a trade agreement would really be effective, and we would probably say no. So it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier set out a clear test for any proposed trade agreement, even though he has not made clear how the test will be met. And I come back, Mr. Speaker, will he insist then on a ratification formula which protects Alberta's interest on these points against the tyranny of the majority?
Mr. Speaker, we've talked about the ratification formula in the past, and if the negotiations had been handled in what we might have thought of as an unsatisfactory way, then clearly a ratification formula may have been something to give serious consideration to. But in fact, what we have done is taken the other position and convinced the federal government of the other position, and that is that the provinces are totally involved all the way along in the negotiations. We have officials who deal with Ottawa, all the provinces do, on virtually daily basis. We have our designated ministers, and Alberta's is our Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, backed up by our Minister of Economic Development and Trade and Agriculture, and others when necessary, who are meeting as well to make sure that we're fully involved. Then we have a virtually unprecedented situation where the First Ministers meet every 3 months. at which time we get a report from the Prime Minister, a report from the Minister, and a report from Ambassador Reisman. Now, we are going along together, fully involved in the negotiations. Therefore, when we get to the end and we see the agreement that we've been a part of, we will be so involved that we will either say it's a good or bad one. It isn't as though we had one suddenly dumped on us and we would then say, well, we have to look and see whether we'll ratify this. But we've been fully a part of it.
You're probably one of the only people that thinks he's been part of it then, Mr. Speaker. My question is to be a little more specific about one of the areas. As the Premier is well aware, the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has recently brought in a ruling which may force Alberta gas exporters to absorb the cost of pipeline charges which were previously borne by U.S. customers. I don't need to tell you that's difficult for the industry, but legal sources say there's not much we can do to appeal. My question specifically, because he says he's been so part of this, what action did the government take in relation to the Progressive Conservative administration in Ottawa to seek a resolution of this important issue at the political level as a precondition for Alberta's support for further trade negotiations?
Well, one of the most foolish things would have been to set a whole bunch of preconditions to any trade negotiation. But, Mr. Speaker, on the very matter that's being discussed, it's those type of things that cause so much trouble in the trade between our two nations. And yet that is our largest trading partner, our neighbor and our friend, the largest trading country in the world. And we are working to get an agreement that eliminates the very thing the honourable member properly raises. So I'm convinced that any true comprehensive trade agreement between our two countries will in fact eliminate that kind of harassment at the border. And as I said in the House, if we are not able to do those kind of things, then I would expect that the trade agreement will not be worth being a part of.
Mr. Speaker, I would have thought that if they didn't do that, there should be no point in even continuing. That's the whole point. It shouldn't be a matter of just faith from the Premier, Mr. Speaker, but I've noticed the most recent American demands at the free trade negotiations is for removal of restrictions of U.S. takeovers of Canadian companies, and specifically for removal of local purchase and local hiring rules for foreign corporations. That's very important for this province. And I think people want to know this. Does the Alberta government support inclusion of these demands in a new free trade agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I guess most people in this Assembly, perhaps not the honourable member, have been involved in negotiations before. And when you're in negotiations, do you think you're never going to hear from the other side that says you better do this or you better do that publicly to try and get themselves a little better position in terms of negotiations? That's what it's all about. That's what a negotiation is all about. There's give and take, and there's threats, and there's move back. But in fact, well, you see, they are so timid. See, they're already admitting defeat, that we give and they take. Now, that is their style. That's the way they think. But that isn't the way this country was built, with that kind of timidity. And they don't have any confidence in Canadians. Canadians are capable of competing and negotiating with anybody in the world. We don't start off saying we're going to get whipped the way this group do. We say we're going to win. We say we're going to do a positive thing for Canada and for Alberta. That's what we're determined to do, and that's what we're going to do. And we're not going to listen to the naysayers and the timid little old NDP who never even would have started. Never would have started. They'd have failed before they ever got going because they didn't have the courage to even try.
Edmonton Gold Bar.
Well, Mr. I'll tell him. Mr. Speaker, I'm not timid. It's reassuring to hear from the Premier that he says if we cannot negotiate a good agreement, that he will not be a part of it. Now, we've begged to see the studies, Mr. Speaker, that this government has as to what the consequences and effects will be. Albertans need confidence in this process, Mr. Premier. They need to know what are the precise criteria that the Premier is going to use on our behalf. May we know what is the absolutes in this process, and what is up for grabs in his thinking? What is it? Is it really a bottom line, Mr. Speaker, or are we playing wait and see?
There were a group of questions there, Mr. Speaker, but nevertheless, I should say, first of all, when you're in negotiation, again, would you end up saying, here are the things that we absolutely make sure that we will never discuss? I mean, you don't want to tell them what your bottom line is when you start. You may end up way above that if you do the right job. Now, I can understand the Liberal Party asking for help in this matter and tell them what to do, because I've never saw a group, both on that and Senate reform and the Constitution, be so mixed up themselves. I mean, that's why the leader yesterday was saying, let's delay this whole thing. Let us try and figure out where the heck the Liberals stand. We don't know where we are. Our federal leader doesn't know where we are. They're all split up. Sure, delay it. But no, Mr. Speaker, we are going to do the positive things that are necessary for Canada. We can't wait for that old, tired bunch of Liberals to figure out where they stand.
Mr. Speaker, question to the Premier. It's difficult to understand free trade when you want to lie in a socialist cradle. And I preamble my question that way, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. In terms of the negotiations, are there two aspects being negotiated in terms of an agreement? First of all, the free trade agreement itself, and then secondly, at the same time, in parallel, an implementation process being negotiated as well. Are there two phases in terms of the agreement, or are we only looking at the initial one in terms of objectives of free trade and then working that out after those are accepted?
Yes, a very important question, Mr. Speaker, and it is a key feature that not only are we negotiating the principles of a free trade agreement, but we are in fact working within it an implementation, an adjustment period, the chance for those industries and parts of the country who have been protected all their lives. Well, in Alberta, we haven't been. We've always been competing, times paying even more than world price. So we're prepared to compete. And probably for Alberta, we can end up in a win-win situation. The things we buy, we will buy cheaper, and the things we sell, we'll have assured markets for. But we are developing, Mr. Speaker, the implementation and the dispute settling mechanism and the adjustment period as well. That will be part of the total package.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we'll go from the South of Canada over to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, many Albertans share deep concern about the alarming incidence of teen pregnancies. And a report prepared for Alberta's 27 health units show Alberta's teens have a 30.4 teen pregnancies per thousand, compared with 23.7 as a national average. Now, Mr. Speaker, every sensible person in the province wants to see this rate reduced. My question to the minister, will the minister reconsider then, with these figures, his decision to cut contraceptive counseling from the list of insured services under the health care insurance plan?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and certain of the news media have not accurately reported what we've done in this regard. I indicated last Tuesday in making the announcement about those matters which would be de-insured that while we would be removing from the fee schedule a specific item involving contraceptive counseling, that we would indeed expect physicians to provide that counseling as a matter of routine under a number of other fee schedules, mainly the annual checkup during the course of visits for pregnancies and other areas as well. I have had an opportunity to review the matter again, and there are only 2 other provinces in Canada that provide a special fee schedule for contraceptive counseling. In all other provinces, it's expected that the medical profession would provide that counseling as a matter of routine. The reports have been that we've somehow taken away the opportunities for doctors to provide contraceptive counseling. That is far from the case. The facts of the matter are that this particular fee code was being badly abused by some in the medical profession who are using it to pad their incomes, quite frankly, when they should have been providing this under the normal fee schedule under annual visits. So Mr. Speaker, there is no suggestion whatever that medical doctors ought not to continue to provide this kind of information, and quite frankly, I think most of them will.
Mr. Speaker, I might point out to the minister that contraceptive counseling during pregnancy is a little late.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, but the point you said is that the doctors are abusing the system. You're not hurting the doctors, you're hurting the young people. And my question, because we seem to always be dealing with treatment, will the minister explain why his new fee schedule for doctors funds therapeutic abortions but not contraception?
So the honourable member is aware it's possible to get pregnant more than once. And it's certainly an accepted practice by our medical profession to provide that kind of counseling during the course of, there's 10 visits allowed under the health care insurance plan during the course of the pregnancy, and I would expect that most doctors, all doctors, when asked at least, would provide that information. The situation, Mr. Speaker, is, as I said, it will continue to be provided, and we're hopeful, Mr. Speaker, that the medical profession will take their responsibilities in this area seriously as they have in the past, and that there will be no change.
Mr. Speaker, if the minister is listening, to any people that deal with young people, that many of them are unaware and have a lack of awareness of sexual matters. And these people want to work with the medical profession to encourage a healthy and safe lifestyle among our youth. And I come back to the minister. What makes the minister think he can solve the problem by funding abortions but not contraceptive counseling?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the situation with regard to abortions is that we are following federal law with regard to therapeutic abortions, and each hospital has a committee that judges whether or not an abortion is medically required, and whether or not continuation of that pregnancy might affect the life or the health of the mother. So theoretically, at least, and all of us know that there's some doubts on occasions about whether or not abortions are really medically required, but theoretically, at least, we have a situation where federal law requires us to provide assistance in that regard. And as I indicated last Tuesday, one of the major reasons that we didn't want to make any move in the area of abortions is that it is a matter that's currently being debated federally, and I think we have to await some direction in that regard before we make any changes there. It's not my anticipation that any will be made in the near future. I do have some concerns about the access, particularly in the city of Edmonton, as a result of the apparent withdrawal of the services of certain physicians who are providing those services, but that's not something that our government has any direct control over.
The minister is avoiding the question. I want to know why contraceptive counseling, not to get into a discussion about abortion. But my question has to do with the same study by the health units found that Alberta teens have a higher than average rate of sexually transmitted diseases. And my question again to the minister, why doesn't the minister give more consideration to these sorts of problems and to the victims and deal specifically with prevention rather than treatment instead of going the other way, which will save us money in the future?
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in the House earlier this week, it's certainly my intention to work with the Minister of Community and Occupational Health and with other organizations throughout the province to ensure that that kind of information is provided as best it possibly can, and hopefully we can improve upon the delivery of that kind of information, particularly to young people. I say again that I don't believe it is the best use of high-paid professionals' time to have the only system in existence be one of individual counseling by medical doctors. Surely we need to have in the education system, provided by health units and community organizations, by the family, by church groups in some places, the kind of information that is required. That is happening in this province, and I'm hopeful that this debate and the interest by the general public in this whole area will improve the kind of advice and information and programs that are available. I could just conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying that the Minister of Community and Occupational Health and myself and our government are extremely strong supporters of the kind of counseling being provided that the honourable member is talking about.
Mr. Speaker.
the Honourable Minister's comments. Just to reiterate what the Minister has said, that counselling, that contraceptive counselling will continue to be available through a physician in regular routine checkups when anyone seeking that advice and counselling visits his or her office. We will continue to provide funding to the 11 of 27 health units providing family planning and contraceptive counselling services. We will encourage those health units to do even more. We will continue to provide funding through the Family and Community Support Services program that provides funding to volunteers.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I think the Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is beginning to answer my question, and it's to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. The Minister of Health and Hospitals and Healthcare has correctly identified that doctors aren't the only people that do this kind of counselling. Will the Minister of Community and Occupational Health therefore ensure that contraceptive counselling, family planning will be available through all public health units through the provision of more funds to them, including outreach programs for them, and that there will be increased support through the FCSS program for private agencies?
Mr. Speaker, those dollars are there, and we would hope to be able to encourage them and provide them with more resources in the days ahead. But those priorities, whether it's Family and Community Support Service agencies or whether it's the 27 local health units, those are priorities established by those local boards of health in each of those health units.
Exactly.
And we will continue to encourage them to take up those responsibilities. But in addition to the comments I made, Mr. Speaker, and I was simply trying to inform the honourable members across, and if they're not interested in the answers or the information, then we'll just continue to do the good work that we're trying to do. In addition to health units, in addition to Family and Community Support Service agencies, we will continue to work with the Department of Education and with all school boards in the province to provide what is going to be a first-rate career and life management program, human sexuality program, sex education where it's necessary, or gender education, as my colleague to the right suggested the other day, that we will continue to provide that assistance so that that curriculum is up to date, it's modern, and it tells our young children in this province how to deal with human sexuality in a modern kind of approach.
Thank you. The member for Red Deer North.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to Minister of Education, as we're hearing that doctors are going to continue, health units will continue, and FCSS programs will continue. Can the Minister of Education tell us if programming is going to continue in gender education involving students and also parents?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the needs of young teenagers in this province are not all met in a physician's office, are not all met in the health units, which is why we've moved so steadfastly to develop a very excellent health curriculum for young teenagers, starting really in elementary, but most importantly, for the purposes of this discussion, in junior high. This is a part of a comprehensive preventative program of government, and it doesn't simply affect one department. Within my own department, the curriculum development speaks not only to the facts with respect to human sexuality, but talks even more importantly, in my view, about the interpersonal relationships and responsibilities which young people pursue.
Speaker, may I designate the first question to the member for Calgary-Buffalo?
Thank you.
Not needed, not this time. To the Minister of Career Development and Employment, as the Minister knows, many groups are interested in obtaining funding from lottery proceeds, including, I note with interest, lately the definitely. I hope everyone else is listening. And I note lately that even the Edmonton Eskimos and the Calgary Stampeder football teams are interested in obtaining lottery funding. After 3 years, the people of this province are still not being given information about the existing lottery operation nor about the government's plans. I would like to ask the Minister of Career Development and Employment whether the Minister can tell this House whether the government is now prepared to allow some of the lottery funds to be used to fund some public education programs in light of recent reports that he has had specific discussions with the Minister of Education on that topic.
First, Honourable Minister, the preamble has portions which are distinctly out of order and perhaps might be regarded as somewhat prejudicial to the member's own court case. However, the question can be dealt with by the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hesitate to say this, Mr. Speaker, but the member for Calgary Buffalo is displaying his ignorance. There are 15 organizations in this province that are run by volunteers that make decisions on where lotteries proceeds go. Millions of dollars are distributed for recreation, culture, and amateur sport, Mr. Speaker. It's distributed by volunteers to the various organizations such as the Wild Rose Foundation, the Recreation and Parks and Wildlife Foundation, the Alberta Foundation for the Performing Arts. There's a number of them, Mr. Speaker, that deal with lotteries proceeds. Thousands of people in this province benefit from the manner in which lotteries proceeds are sold, the manner in which lotteries proceeds are distributed. And I can assure the member that it will continue to be distributed in that manner. And I know that he has a particular concern about the surplus, Mr. Speaker, but as long as I'm minister, will preserve the integrity of those organizations by making sure that there is funding there in the future, irrespective of what happens to lottery sales in this province.
Is the minister telling this House that there is going to be no funding for education, for creating jobs, for the handicapped, for social services out of lottery funds unless decisions are made by existing beneficiary organizations to make those expenditures?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have within our annual budgets within a variety of departments, I guess billions of dollars that we spend in those areas. I should also say to the member that I have people tell me that the success of the sales of lotteries tickets in Alberta has a lot to do with where we direct those funds, that it goes to amateur sport, to recreation and culture, and they're willing to support it, Mr. Speaker, along with the chance of winning a ticket. And organizations such as the Research and Training Center for the Physically Disabled, which is now the Rick Hansen Center, will continue with the use of lotteries proceeds. And I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe personally, nor do my colleagues in government believe, that we underfund in this government. We're trying to get a handle on expenditure, Mr. Speaker. We're not necessarily looking for more money to put in these areas. It's to preserve the needs of Albertans in a number of ways, Mr. Speaker, but certainly it's, in my view, do not think that lotteries proceeds should go to general revenues. I believe that we take care in a very appropriate way those organizations under health and education.
That's spectacularly enlightening, Mr. Speaker. Along the same lines, perhaps I might ask the minister why the minister has refused to provide myself with and make public a copy of the very basic licensing agreements between the provincial government and the Western Canada Lottery Foundation. What's he hiding?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not hiding anything, and if the honourable member the honourable member has asked me for the information. I've suggested he put it on the order paper. He has not done that. That's the parliamentary process, Mr. Speaker. I'll address it at that time. For him to suggest that it's a secret, there are thousands of people that access lotteries funds through these organizations. How can that be a secret, Mr. Speaker?
We've just spent 3 weeks debating the minister's refusal to answer the last question on the order paper. This is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier is aware that many Albertans are hurting badly and that this matter has drifted for 3 years now. Why doesn't the Premier show some leadership on this issue and ensure that the government comes clean and makes some decisions now so that we can get the use of this money, some of this money, to save jobs and some needed social programs?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Career Development and Employment has dealt very adequately with the comments made by the member for Calgary-Buffalo. But I think it is clear that he is following the typical Liberal line, which is what you try to do is find every pot, every supply of dollars anywhere and try and spend them. We saw them do that in Ottawa. We saw them look and try and find, not restrain themselves in any way, not try and do what was an adequate or right amount of funding, but to make promises, 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 go about bankrupting the nation until they were booted out. Bankrupting the nation, Mr. Speaker, and they even had the nerve, the Liberals, supported by the NDP, when they ran out of their normal taxation dollars, to impose the PGRT and come and rip off Alberta and spend that as well. And now, Mr. Speaker, we're trying to correct the abuses, and here he is again saying, give us more money so we can spend it.
Evans, followed by Littlebow.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I think the Premier forgot something about the $50 billion that usually comes in at that point, too. My supplementary is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. Given the controversy about this very issue, that is, the money is not being currently spent, will the Minister agree to introducing a bill this sitting which would deliver over authority of the expenditures to the Legislative Assembly? Will he commit himself to doing that?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not willing to make that commitment today. I believe that the manner in which the proceeds from lotteries are expended in this province are very appropriate, and I can assure by the volumes of mail I get from the cultural, recreational, and sporting organizations as a result of the absurd suggestions by the member for Calgary-Buffalo, we will continue to handle it in that way. We license these organizations every 3 years. It's traditionally handled. They are people that citizens, volunteers that volunteer their time for these organizations to review applications and then make decisions as to where funding should go. I believe that the people of Alberta that are on these boards have the qualities and the capabilities to make decisions as to where lotteries proceeds go. Those decisions just don't have to rest in this House, Mr. Speaker. There are other people in this province that can make good and appropriate decisions about many things, including the use of lotteries, and I intend to continue along that line of thinking, Mr. Speaker.
Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, I question the Honourable Premier. In light of the fact that the financial conditions have changed in this province in the last 3 years, is the Premier in a position to indicate if there is a committee of Cabinet reviewing the large amount of funds that are under the Minister's jurisdiction at this time to look intimately at how these funds are being spent and possibly look at a change of how these funds will be looked after?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on a constant basis, all funds available to the government are considered by the Treasury Board and Priorities Committee of Cabinet, and the whole Cabinet, for that matter, and caucus. So there would always be a review of matters like this.
Member for Littlebow, followed by the member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Provincial Treasurer. As of yesterday, interest rates increased some 0.5%. We've had severe frost damage in southern Alberta yesterday and the day before in terms of legume crops, and we've, as the Minister well knows, had some 18% drop in agricultural prices. Could the Minister indicate whether at this time the government is prepared to reconsider the 5% per litre tax on gasoline and fuels for farmers in Alberta?
Again, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in the House yesterday, there is no additional tax under the fuel tax legislation proposed by this Assembly for farmers. Farmers are exempt from the fuel tax, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Provincial Treasurer, it's, I guess, the mathematics at the other end. Could the Ontario yesterday announced that in their budget they would allow a 100% rebate in terms of taxes on farm lands. Would the minister indicate whether that's being considered by the government and whether that's one of the options that could be used to assist the farmers of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, again, any discussion with respect to moratorium, either on debt or on taxes, has been clearly dealt with by the Minister of Agriculture and by the ministers over the course of the session this spring, in which we have said that we are not at this point prepared to deal with moratoriums of that order. However, Mr. Speaker, it is a matter of record, and I see that my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture, is in the constituency today, that we have brought forward a very massive amount of assistance to the agricultural sector. In 1985, that amount reached close to $800 million. We continued with that obligation through 1987-88 budget proposals. And again, the amount of the assistance on a variety of programs is extremely significant. Coupled with that, Mr. Speaker, the initiatives taken by this government as a result of the commitments in the election of May 8, 1986, we did in fact put in place an unmatched and unparalleled funding program for farmers, which provided them with long-term funding, long-term financial assistance at 9% levels. Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying in a very small way here is that we have done an amazing amount for the farming sector. We realize the difficulties and the unfortunate situations that world-driven prices have placed that sector in presently, and I do believe, however, that there is some optimism in the longer term with respect to two areas which, both in the case of commodity prices and in the case of new resolve to deal with the subsidies by many trading partners, might in fact lead us to conclude that the prices should move up after this low period we're now going through.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Assistant Minister of Agriculture. Could the minister indicate the impact that some of the sales of American wheat is having in terms of sales to Russia on the Canadian market? And has it been brought to the minister's attention as the person responsible for agriculture here in Alberta? Mr. Speaker, I'm closer.
Land, and now we're selling grain to Russia. That's a pretty difficult thing.
It's agriculture. We're just trying to help the farmers, Mr. Speaker, that's all, in a general way.
And I was just trying to help beaver life.
Right. Could the minister indicate whether the sales of wheat from Canada to Russia have been impacted by the gyrations that are going on in the United States at the present time, and is anyone through her department monitoring the impact?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure the honourable member from Little Bull that we are monitoring the impact. There's no question in my mind, or I'm sure in anybody's mind in agriculture, that the competition of other countries makes the sale of grain tougher. One of the things that farmers in Alberta and Canada are particularly impacted by are the internal policies of the European Common Market countries and of the United States on our exports. And one of the reasons, Mr. Speaker, that those internal policies impact so detrimentally on Alberta and on Canada is that the European Common Market export $2,000 worth of produce per farmer. United States exports $6,000 worth of produce per farmer. Alberta farmers export $24,000 worth of produce per farmer. So the impact of their internal subsidies has approximately either 12 times the impact or 3 times the impact on our exports that they do on their exports. So there's no question, Mr. Speaker, that it's serious. The Canadian Wheat Board indicates that they are keeping their sales intact. In fact, when I was down in Winnipeg, the United States salespeople had just been there, and they were trying to find out how Canada had been able to maintain our export sales at the level that we were, given that our sales were higher and that they were offering subsidized sales. The fact is our sales were maintained because of the quality and the consistent deliverability that we've shown over the years to our customers.
Culture, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I assume that I can ask almost any question on any variety of topics in agriculture, and I would like to focus on one it's a smorgasbord. It's about Beaver Lodge. It's a smorgasbord of delights for me. I would like to simply question the Treasurer on one of his responses concerning the Farm Loan Assistance Program. Could the Treasurer please inform the House what portion of the Farm Loan Assistance Program is now in default, and when will the government begin foreclosing on these loans as they are on other farm loans?
Mr. Speaker, I have no record of any of the new assistance under the Farm Credit Stability Program being in default.
Member for Vegreville. If there is time, we will go on to other members in the House today.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Associate Minister of Agriculture, I'm wondering if she can tell this House and the farmers of Alberta how long the report on the review of the role and mandate of the Agricultural Development Corporation has been in her caucus, and why hasn't it been presented publicly?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly can. We do not have the ADC Review Committee's report at this time in our caucus. We have discussed with some of the possible ideas we've got on financing, because we recognize that financing agriculture today is very, very expensive, and that the commodity prices today cannot, in some cases, cover the cost of financing, and that we have to look at innovative ways of financing agriculture if we're to ensure a viable agriculture industry in the future.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe, followed by Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Social Services, and it's related to daycare standards and the enforcement of those standards. And I wonder if the Minister can inform the Assembly if in the last short while that these standards for daycare and the enforcement policy for enforcement of those standards have changed.
No, Mr. Speaker, they have not.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister can also inform the Assembly of the fear that many parents have if they report what they think are infractions in daycare operations, and the concern they have if their children, or that they can't immediately find another babysitter, another daycare for their children. That is there anything that the department does to assist them in that, and to see that they have no fear of reporting infractions? And who do they report these infractions to?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the first part of the question, I would say that parents, as they have done in the past, and I would continue to encourage them to, would report infractions to their closest district office that relates to the daycare centre under question. The second part is that at all times, the people who work in the child care area are willing to provide information to parents as to daycares or family day homes that are located in their area.
My second supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is about a year ago or a year and a half ago, there was a supposed list of approximately 12 daycares that needed substantial improvement in the province. And I wonder if now, if the Minister is prepared to act on daycares that report problems, that are looked at either by the Social Care Facilities Review Committee or looked at by the department, if these problems appear more than once or twice rather than go on year after year after year before any action is taken.
Mr. Speaker, there is obviously some judgment exercised by the licensing officers as reports are brought forward, and they can come in one of three ways. Obviously, the first concern usually is raised by parents. Secondly, the licensing officers in their inspections of child care centres may serve notice that there are a number of things that need to be rectified that offend the regulations. And also, as the honourable member has quite appropriately raised, the Social Care Facilities Review Committee that visits, and I think last year some close to 600 centres in the province, provides information and advice to the minister at all times. That information is followed up immediately by our licensing officers, and a judgment is exercised by those officers as to whether they believe that in fact the centre should have notice served that they could possibly be closed. Obviously, in other instances, as has happened now on 2 occasions, when information is provided to the minister because the department feels that the situation is growing to be a very serious one and children may be at risk, the minister may also exercise some judgment.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary then to the minister is in one of the reports of the Social Care Facilities Review Committee a year or 2 ago, there was a recommendation that all daycares, private and public, would have to report their programs, their incomes, their expenses, and show that to the minister or the department. Is the minister now prepared to accept that proposal?
Mr. Speaker, to some degree, I believe that we have that in place, though it is certainly, in fairness to our licensing people, they have had some difficulty in getting the information that was to be provided. Obviously, in an administrative sense, it's a very cumbersome program, but Mr. Speaker, where we have had the cooperation of child care centres, there has been no problem with it. But where child care centres, daycare centres, choose to not abide by the regulations, certainly that is a problem for us. The regulations are in place, and at all times we believe they should be enforced.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Thank you. Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that when problems are identified in daycares by inspectors, that the daycare is referred to a consultant to provide support for correction. It's further my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that the consultant program has now been discontinued due to various restraints in the budget. Will the minister now undertake to reinstate that consultant availability immediately?
Mr. Speaker, we have some very excellent people in our child care programs, and if the honourable member is suggesting that a consultant can impart into any particular daycare centre or the operator or owner of that centre some common sense or indeed some morality, I'm afraid she's mistaken.
Edmonton Calder.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. Will the minister indicate to this assembly whether or not she will increase the number of licensing officers in order that proper and increased monitoring can take place to ensure that our children are placed in safe child care?
Mr. Speaker, we believe that we do have adequate monitoring in place. Certainly, I mentioned the 3 areas that at any one time from those areas that concerns can be raised, and when concerns are raised, and I certainly would be urging parents to much more closely watch what is happening in their child care centres, that we would investigate immediately.
Before calling orders of the day, the chair wants to express some concern about the slow motion movement of question period. For example, for the 3rd day in a row, we have now left 5, 6, 7 members of the House waiting in the wings, and a fair amount of the slowdown process is occurring for a variety of reasons. We have dealt today with approximately 29 questions, but we've only really got through 5 topics. The other thing one of the difficulties that's happening here is that we're developing preambles to supplementaries, and that just simply has to stop. The matter also is that then we're coming up with 2 and 3 questions in our supplementaries. And so ministers of the Crown are then feeling that they have to respond to all three of the questions involved in the supplementaries. And as a rough count today, I come up with at least 10 extra questions that were thrown into supplementaries. So I just point this out to members of the House that while members waiting in the wings are developing frustration, they should also realize some of the factors involved as to why the chair is not able to get to all members of the House. Well, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the chair did point that out in the last 2 days, that indeed some of the answers were quite long, but dealt with that with some of the topics with respect to hospital and medical care involved some slightly longer answers, and the chair has indeed interrupted a number of cabinet ministers in the course of the week. The chair just offers these comments to the House that perhaps in question period we might try to deal with. Certainly, far fewer supplementaries being asked in the supplementaries, or else the chair will have to intervene after the first question has been asked as a supplementary. The chair also understands that there's a point of order to be raised or a point of privilege. Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to, on the understanding that we're going to deal with the matter of privilege today that is before this legislature, that I wanted to deal with it.
The chair is not aware of any matter at this point in time, so the chair will wait and hear. Orders of the day, might we revert briefly to the introduction of special guests? The member for